Hello. Today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different to my usual content. I'm going to be going for a more in-depth look at the Bad Batch Season 1. I'm going to be talking about each of the episodes, and I'm going to be ranking them on a tier list. Now, this isn't the first time I've covered the Bad Batch. My last video was actually a review of the first season. Now, in that video, I talked about some of my general thoughts on the season and what I liked about it, what I thought could have been improved. And I did go kind of in depth on the first episode, but aside from that I didn't touch much on the rest of the episodes. So I'm going to be going pretty in depth in this video. I'm going to be talking about all the characters or the episodes, so it's going to be pretty spoiler heavy. If you haven't seen this yet and you do want to watch it, I recommend you watch it first and then come back to this. Or if you're not sure if you want to watch it or not, I recommend checking out my review, which gives away a few minor things, but it doesn't give too many spoilers. So without further ado, let me jump straight into the first episode. Couple things about this episode. First of all, it is much longer than all the other ones. It is over 70 minutes long, whereas all the other episodes are around the 20 to 30 mark. So this episode is a bit unique in that it has a lot of extra time, and I think because of this, it kind of does get a bit of an unfair advantage. Now, I went pretty in-depth on it in my Bad Batch Season 1 review, so I'll be quick with the synopsis here. Essentially, it shows the end of the Clone War when the Republic becomes the Empire. While this is happening, the Bad Batch have their loyalties tested by Tarkin, who sends them on a mission to kill some separatists. They go there expecting to find droids, but what they actually find are people, and among them are Saw Gerrera. Now, Hunter, who is the leader of the Bad Batch, decides that they're not going to go through with this mission, and they return to Kamino, despite Crosshair's protests saying that they need to finish the mission. Anyway, they end up going back to Kamino, and they get arrested for treason. However, the Bad Batch are able to escape. However, Crosshair is separated because he gets taken out to a lab before they escape, and the Empire turns up his inhibitor chip, and he ends up fighting alongside them. So there's a big standoff between the Bad Batch and Crosshair, but eventually the Bad Batch barely managed to escape. Now, this episode is it's a really good setup. It establishes the differences between Hunter and Crosshair. We're introduced to Omega, and we get to see sort of the beginning of that Hunter and Omega dynamic. And it also kind of sets up the whole Republic becoming the Empire thing. Yeah, it's the first episode, obviously, is going to set lots of things up, but it sets it up really well. I think it's a very, very good episode. Very well done. And as a little homage to the Clone Wars, it actually opens like a Clone Wars episode, which is a small thing, a minor thing. It's a thing that I really liked. I really appreciated. Now, another thing I touched on in my review for the first season was the overuse of pre-existing characters. Now, this episode, it does have a lot of characters from other things. I mentioned Tarkin and Saw Gerrera. They're both characters that get overused quite a lot, I think. I mean, it sort of makes sense in this context, so I'll give him a pass. Especially Tarkin. He feels sort of natural to include. And then we have AZ3 and some of the Kaminoans. They also sort of make sense because they're on Kamino. The episode also opens up with a cameo from Caleb Doom, or as you may know him, Kanan Jarrus. They didn't necessarily need to include him, but it's harmless enough. It doesn't really affect anything. So, although I think it's a little distracting, there's a lot of pre-existing characters. At least for this episode, they're mostly harmless enough, or make sense. I think this one just has to be an S tier. It is just a very, very good setup. It's the perfect way for them to set up the show, I believe. Give a very, very brief synopsis of the episode. Essentially, the Bad Batch go to Saleucami, where they meet with Cutler Quain, who was the clone deserter from that season 2 episode in the Clone Wars. Anyway, while they're there, they sort of witness the Empire rolling out their new chain code thing, and then they end up helping Cut and his family leave the system. There's also a bit of a fight between the Bad Batch and some clones there, but they manage to escape, but they do sustain some damage on their ship. Now, the main things that are really good about this episode is the focus on Hunter and Omega. So this is where we get to see Hunter start to try and learn how to be that sort of parental figure for Omega. So Cut Lawquane, as a father and a family man, is the perfect character to sort of highlight what that looks like, what that should look like, which I think was good for Hunter to sort of see that. It's a nice little beginning to the Hunter and Omega dynamic. As for the episode itself, it's pretty good. Like, there's nothing in it that's really like mind-blowing, but it's a solid episode. I can't really fault it for anything. So I think it definitely deserves its place in B tier. Now, following on from the end of the last episode, the Bad Batch end up crashing on a planet because of the damage they sustained to their ship. So while they're there, they have to sort of repair the ship, but then their like power thing gets stolen by this creature that eats energy. So then they have to go hunt it down. It ends up attacking them, and in the end it's left up to Omega to go and get the battery and return it. However, this episode also follows Crosshair. So we get to see the Empire introducing an elite squad with volunteers, and they put this squad under the command of Crosshair. And they end up going back to Onderon, where Saw Gerrera was. Now, he's since left, but there's like a few people that's still there. So Crosshair and his team take them out and then execute everyone. This episode really does show us what Crosshair is getting up to, which I quite liked, because he is part of the Bad Batch, even if he's been sort of separated from them now. And it sort of shows his willingness to do what he thinks needs to be done. There's a really good scene, like, he returns to his barracks, which was the barracks that belonged to the Bad Batch, but it's since been cleaned up and turned into a barracks for his new team. And he sort of like looks at the tally marks from all their successful missions, and then he just sits down on his bed and get this long look as he's just sitting there. It was a pretty good scene. I think really brought the whole episode together. We also get to see like a little bit of the whole Empire and Kamino dynamics. Just a little bit, just touches on it in this episode. I'd put this episode in B tier. The whole Bad Batch stuff wasn't the most interesting, but Crosshair's side of the story really brings it up a bit and really saves it from going into C tier. So in this episode, we have Fennec Shand, who you might remember from The Mandalorian or from the Book of Boba Fett. Now, she's a bounty hunter, and she's been hired to take Omega. So she ends up taking Omega, but then there's like a bit of a chase scene where Hunter's going after her. And you have like everyone in the Bad Batch is sort of in different sort of places at the time, and they all sort of have to do their own thing to try and get her back. It's an alright episode. Like, I don't think there's anything particularly bad about it. It's just sort of an average episode, and I don't have a whole lot to say about it. So I'm going to give it a C tier. I will say that the chase scene is pretty good. And as for Fennec Shand, like, she's a bounty hunter, so it's believable that she would appear in this situation. It does feel a little bit like they're like, oh, look, it's Fennec Shand from that other show. Just the way, like, the shots linger on her. But it's harmless enough, and it's believable that she would be in this show. So it's fine. Now, this is the episode which sort of introduces us to Sid. Now, Sid runs this, like, bar or whatever, and what she does is she ends up giving the Bad Batch a place to stay and provides them with, like, food and supplies and all that. In exchange, the Bad Batch do missions for her, and she gets, like, the biggest cut of the earnings. So this is where the Bad Batch sort of settle down a little bit and become mercenaries, I guess. Anyway, the first mission they end up doing is they have to go rescue a kid from Zygerian slavers. So the Bad Batch go to do that. They leave Omega behind at the ship. But then the entire Bad Batch gets captured. So it's up to Omega to go rescue them. Now, the twist of this episode is that the kid they were hired to rescue is actually a Rancor. The episode itself is, it's alright. Like, nothing I can really fault it for. So I'd give it a C tier. It is an important episode for establishing Sid, though, who becomes sort of quite an important character throughout the series. This is also the episode where Omega gets her weapon of choice, which is a bow, but like a sci-fi energy bow, because, you know, we're in space. Also, Bib Fortuna is in this episode. He's the one who actually wanted this mission done to rescue the Rancor. I'm guessing that implies the Rancor may have been the one from Return of the Jedi, which, if it is the case, that is just such a random thing it's so random to show. Like, why would you need to do that? But, I mean, I guess that's not confirmed. Anyway, that's sort of random, but whatever. So in this episode, Sid hires the Bad Batch to do another mission. They're going to go to a decommissioning facility that's destroying all the battle droids. The Bad Batch have to go there and find a tactical droid to download intel from it. So they end up going there and they end up running into the Martez sisters, who are from the Clone Wars, who are also there to get the tactical droid head. So then there's a bit of conflict between them. The local security droids also get alerted to their presence, so they end up having to fight like hordes and hordes of these police droids or whatever. To escape the facility, they end up having to connect to the tactical droid, and they end up using it to order the battle droids to attack all the police droids. So they like turn on like all the battle droids and they're like all fighting the police droids. Overall, I was not a huge fan of this episode. The Martez sisters they didn't really add anything. They sort of dragged the episode down a bit. The only good part of this episode was the whole thing with Wrecker. Now, essentially, Wrecker ends up bumping his head real bad, and he has this like moment where he's like saying, "Good soldiers follow orders," which is a line that has become associated with Order 66. Now, it's a pretty good moment, and it's sort of been built up to... Because in a lot of the previous episodes, Wrecker has been complaining about his head hurting. He's had a bit of a headache, which has sort of just been something that was mentioned, but never really the focus. This is where the show's like, yeah, this is definitely something you should be paying attention to. And it's a pretty good scene, which does sort of set up the next episode. But yeah, aside from that, most of this episode wasn't that great. It's just a very weak episode. I'm going to have to put it in D tier. I'll admit it was cool to see like the battle droids again, even briefly, but like, that doesn't give it any extra points. Also, this is a very minor thing, but it kind of bugs me because Echo says something about never expecting to be fighting alongside battle droids, which is something that Echo has done before in the Citadel arc, and we do know he remembers being at the Citadel. It's just a little weird. Like, it's not a big thing; it's just a small thing that sort of takes you out of the moment a bit. Now, in this episode, we actually get to meet Rex. He comes to visit the Bad Batch. They sort of reconnect a bit, but then when Rex finds out that the Bad Batch still have their inhibitor chips in their heads, he gets like really tense and he gets all serious and he's like, those things are a ticking time bomb. You've got to get them out. So he ends up taking them to this kind of like this trash planet where there's this like old abandoned Republic cruiser. So he takes the Bad Batch there and they go into the cruiser to use the medical facility to get rid of their inhibitor chips. Now, Wrecker, who has been complaining about his head hurting, it's decided that he needs to go first. So they're getting ready to hook him up and take the thing out when Order 66 seems to trigger in his head. He ends up attacking the Bad Batch and there's a bit of a fight between them. Like, for the most part, Wrecker's generally played up for laughs, but once like Order 66 triggers, like, he's deadly serious, and it's actually somewhat scary. Eventually, though, the Bad Batch do manage to take him down, and everyone gets their chips removed. Everything looks good, so Rex is like, alright, I'm going to bounce, see yous. So he leaves. Well, the Bad Batch are going to stay for a little bit. Then the episode ends right after showing us some people working for the mining guild or whatever spotting Hunter, and they say they're going to call the Empire. So we get that bit of a cliffhanger at the end there. So yeah, this episode is just really good. Like, the whole build-up towards the whole Order 66 moment was really good. Like, this has been something that's been built up from the start of the show, essentially. And yeah, the fight itself was just outstanding. It's also probably got some of the best moments for Wrecker. Now, Rex does make a lot of sense to bring into this show, so I think that was fine, because he did need someone who knows the true danger of the inhibitor chips to give the Bad Batch that push to, like, get rid of them. And obviously they need someone who knows how to get rid of them. There's another minor thing I didn't like, though, like with Echo. So there's this moment where Rex briefly mentions fives, and Echo has, like, no reaction, really, which really annoyed me. From the time since he came back in Season 7 of the Clone Wars to the first season of the Bad Batch, presumably Echo did find out about what happened to fives. I guess we can assume that, but we never see that. There's never any moment where he, wonders where fives is or something. Like, did Dave Filoni forget that Echo and Fives were, like, really close? I don't know. It kind of rubs me the wrong way. Like, there's nothing about that. Not in the Clone Wars, not in the Bad Batch. Now, I just want to say that's not going to affect my ranking of this episode. It's just a minor thing. As for the ranking, this episode is going to go in A tier. I don't think it's quite, like, top tier, but it is a very, very good episode. And it leads straight into episode 8, Reunion. So in this episode, the Empire shows up. A bunch of clones come, led by Crosshair himself. And this leads to a very tense situation where the Bad Batch need to escape the cruiser, but Crosshair and his clones are now boarding the ship and searching for them. Now, it's a very good episode. It's very tense, and Crosshair continually outsmarts the Bad Batch. He foresees their moves before they make them. He ends up attacking them first in, like, the gun bay. However, the Bad Batch managed to cause a distraction and escape, because they actually end up firing one of the gun batteries, which ends up, like, destroying the whole room and bringing, like, everything down, because it's like the ship's so old it's falling apart. And then there's this bit where they end up getting trapped in one of the engines. The way they escape that as well is just really well done. I really like how this episode makes really good use of the environment. Like, the fact that the episode takes place on an abandoned Jedi cruiser actually plays into how they, escape situations and all that. Like, they make good use of the environment. And of course, it's good to see the Bad Batch and Crosshair interacting again, because the last time they were together was in the first episode. So it's really good to see the sort of, like, dialogue between them. Overall, just outstanding episode. And then at the end, Hunter and Omega get separated from the rest of the Bad Batch. They head to the ship, and then someone familiar steps out of their ship, Cad Bane. Anyway, there's a bit of a standoff between Cad Bane and Hunter. They have one of those old-fashioned Western duels. Hunter ends up losing, and Cad Bane takes Omega. The rest of the Bad Batch catch up. They revive Hunter, and we get this really cool shot where we basically see from Hunter's perspective as he's woken up and he has to get onto the ship. It's a really cool little visual, which is not something you get to see very often, but I really liked it. And the episode ends with them escaping from the Empire, but Omega is now kidnapped. Overall, really good episode. It's easily an S tier. And I know I complained a lot about them using pre-existing characters, but Cad Bane, he's one that was really cool to see. And he does make sense. Again, a bounty hunter sort of makes sense because they need a bounty hunter. May as well use him. But yeah, this episode's just one of the best in the season. I'd say it's probably in my favorite episode, to be honest. So it's an easy S tier. Now, the Bad Batch sort of take a back seat in this episode, and it's mostly about Omega. Omega spends the whole episode trying to escape from Cad Bane and Fennec Shand, who shows up. The two of them end up like having a fight. So while they're fighting, Omega is trying to get away and contact the Bad Batch. Overall, this is a great episode. It's good to have a focus on Omega and see her try and handle a situation, you know, on her own. She doesn't really have much backup in this one. Also, the fight between Cad Bane and Fennec Shand was handled pretty well. I quite liked it. Like, they're pretty evenly matched. And I kind of like that. They don't have one of them just, like, completely demolish the other. This episode also gives us a bit of the whole Kaminoan intrigue subplot, which doesn't get much screen time, but this is one of the episodes that does show it a little bit, because there's like, the Kaminoans have got like their own sort of agendas that don't necessarily align with the Empire, and even like amongst the Kaminoans, they don't necessarily all have the same goals. So I think this episode, it has to go in A tier. Like, it's not like an S tier, it's not one of the best, but it's also better than like all the B tier stuff. So it's got to go in A tier. So essentially, the Bad Batch get hired to rescue a senator from the Empire. The catch is that this senator is a separatist. Now, I really like this episode because there's sort of an arc. When the Bad Batch are presented with the mission, they're like, yeah, not going to happen. We're not helping a separatist. But then they end up going on the mission. They fight like the Empire and all that. Eventually manage to rescue the senator. And there's this nice little moment right at the end where the senator's like thinking, how can I run away from my people? Like, how can I just abandon them? And like Echo's like, he will help them, but for now you just have to live to fight another day. Which is kind of a nice moment and shows character growth from the start of the episode where Echo's like, no, I'm not going to help the separatist. So yeah, a bit of a small little arc in there, which was alright. It's not necessarily given the most development, but it exists. And it's probably the closest thing Echo has to an arc in this series. So this episode also sort of, it marks the point where the Bad Batch start going after the Empire more. Like, obviously they fought the Empire a couple episodes back, but that was on the defensive. Now they're actually going on the offensive and making moves against the Empire. It was also really cool to see the ATTEs, which were actually being used by the Empire, which is pretty cool because they never really get associated with the Empire. Because obviously, by the time of the Empire, they get rid of ATTs and they have their ATSTs or their ATATs or whatever else they got. So yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty good episode. I'd say it deserves its place in B tier. Now, this episode is a bit different. So rather than being about the Bad Batch, this episode actually follows different characters. And the Bad Batch only act as like a cameo, essentially. Anyway, this episode is all about Ryloth. So we get to see Charm Syndulla, as well as his wife, and Hera Syndulla. There's also Orn Free Tar, who was in the Clone Wars, and Gobi, who is Charm's lieutenant, essentially. So the main thing that sort of happens in this episode is that Gobi manipulates Hera into joining him on a mission to get some weapons from the black market, which is where the Bad Batch come in. They're actually the ones delivering the weapons. But see, the Empire catches on to the fact that they've got weapons or whatever, so they shoot them down and arresting them. This prompts Charm and his wife to gather up a bunch of their fighters and they go fight the Empire to try and free their daughter. However, in the end, they end up getting captured and basically everyone gets like thrown in jail except for Hera, who manages to escape with Chopper. Oh yeah, Chopper's there. As a whole, this episode, it's really mostly just set up. It's set up for the next episode. There are a few good things that are set up in this one which get paid off later. I'll talk about them in the next episode. Now, it's a pretty good episode. It sort of shows the Empire taking control slowly, which is pretty good. However, it does continue the trend of using pre-existing characters, which is a lot more distracting in this episode in particular because the Bad Batch are only a cameo in this episode. It feels like they're doing an episode about Hera. Like, it feels like she's meant to be the main character of this episode, which does rub me the wrong way a little bit because it's meant to be the Bad Batch's show. But putting that aside, it is, a reasonable episode. So I'm going to give it a B tier. It is pretty good, but it is mostly set up for the next episode. We do get to see some good crosshair action though, so that's something. Now, this is where the previous episode begins to make a bit more sense because now we have a typical episode where we have the Bad Batch being sent on a mission. Hera ends up asking them to rescue her parents. So the Bad Batch end up coming to Ryloth. And now it takes a bit of a convincing, but eventually they agree to help out and they hatch a plan. Part of the team goes to rescue Hera's parents, while the others serve as a distraction by attacking like a base elsewhere. Overall, it's actually quite a good episode. It's another episode that sort of continues the trend of the Bad Batch taking the fight to the Empire, which I quite like. You got sort of that like escalation from the beginning where they were avoiding the Empire and now they're like taking the fight straight to them. But the best thing with Crosshair in this episode was the moment where all the Imperials are on their way to that other base that's under attack. Crosshair stops and he realizes that it's a distraction. So he stays back to ambush the Bad Batch. I do like this. It shows that he's smart and he knows the Bad Batch. There's this really good scene. So there's this clone commander called Hauser. Now, he was introduced in the previous episode, and throughout that episode, he was portrayed as a good clone, and he seemed to have a bit more of a conscience than the rest of the clones who haven't had much characterization since the whole Order 66 thing. Now, this is something that's continually built up in this episode as well, and it finally culminates in this moment at the end where he stops the Bad Batch from walking out into that ambush that Crosshair set up. He tells them of an alternate route to escape, and then it's Hauser who walks out that door and comes face to face with all these clones, and he gives this like speech about how what they're doing is wrong, about how they have become the occupiers and all that. He encourages his men to stand with him, and some of them actually like throw down their weapons. They all get arrested. We don't see what happens to them, but presumably they all end up getting put to death. I don't know, who knows, maybe he's like in a prison somewhere. We'll have to wait and see if he shows up later. It was a really good moment. I really liked it. Like, it showed that there are still good clones even after the whole Order 66 thing. I think this episode deserves to go in A tier. It is quite a good one, and it does sort of justify the previous episode a bit because like there is like stuff in this that probably wouldn't have had the same impact if it wasn't built up properly before. Like the whole thing with Hauser. I think without that previous episode, I don't think his speech at the end would have had the same impact. Now, the basic idea of this episode is the Bad Batch come back from a mission to find that Sid is no longer at the bar and someone else has taken over. When they go back to their ship, they meet with Sid, who is there, and then essentially they find out that someone else has taken over, and they hatch a plan to get rid of this person by screwing up their shipment that they're meant to deliver to the Pike Syndicate. So they go through this like underground mining tunnel to get to this like secret entrance into Sid's office, and they steal his spice. Now, the problem here is that the tunnel is filled with all these bugs. If you've ever played Halo, essentially they're buggers or drones. Anyway, it's an alright episode. There's nothing too special about it. You have like the whole tunnel thing that they have to go through. They actually go through, they go into that area 3 times. The first time is when they're sneaking through, which sort of builds the tension and establishes, there's danger here, but they don't necessarily alert all the buggers at this stage. Then, after they've taken the spice, they go back through, but now, because of blaster fire, they've actually been, like, alerted. They get, like, swarmed when they're passing through, and they end up dropping all the spice into the cave or whatever. And then they have to end up going back a third time because the Pikes want their spice back. And they're like, yeah, give us our spice and we'll consider the matter resolved. So the Bad Batch have to go back and collect the spice. And it's during this time that they end up getting awoken a third time. But this time, Tech is able to scare them all away by making, like, the strongest flashbang in existence. I did sort of like that reuse of the area sort of built the tension. But yeah, overall, it's an alright episode, but there's nothing too special about it. So I'd say it goes in C tier. Now, in this one, Rex actually contacts the Bad Batch and he asks them to go rescue a friend of his, a clone named Gregor, who you may remember from the Clone Wars or from Rebels. So they go to this planet and they find a Imperial facility. Now, one of the main things that this episode does is it sort of shows off the TK troopers, which I mentioned in my review for the first season of Bad Batch, but essentially they're early versions of stormtroopers. Their armor is like somewhere between a stormtrooper and a clone trooper, and they're made up of like volunteers, I think. And they're actually at this facility, they're being trained by clone commandos. So as well as the TK troopers, we have clone commandos running around. In the end of this episode, Hunter actually gets left behind. The rest of the Bad Batch are forced to flee and leave Hunter behind. He gets captured, which was a great way to actually raise the stakes. And it leads straight into the 2-part finale, which is next. But before I cover that, a few other things I want to talk about with this episode. First of all, I've sort of been ragging on some of like Echo's worst moments throughout this show. This has probably got like one of his best moments. Like, there's a moment at the start where Hunter, and Tech are scouting out this facility. Hunter's like, yeah, we can't do this. Like, there's no telling where Rex's friend is or if he's even still alive. We can't go into this facility and rescue him. We just have to get out. And Echo gives this whole speech about how, like, when you rescued me on Skoko Minor, you had no idea if I was still alive or not. He urges them to continue the mission, which was pretty good. It's probably one of Echo's best moments in the series. This episode, it sort of concludes the whole Kamino and intrigue story. We get to see the Kaminoan Prime Minister preparing to leave with his like best scientists and all that, but then the Empire actually finds out and it's heavily implied that they kill him, but we don't technically see it. However, they do take the main scientist, who's been one of the main Kaminoan characters in the show, and they take her to a facility where they plan on using her scientific knowledge for reasons that have yet to be explained, but presumably will come into play in the next season. There's also a minor thing, not really my place to talk about it too much. There is a cameo for one of the Republic Commandos, or someone who appears to be one of the Republic Commandos from that video game. I think officially Star Wars is like, no, it's not that person. But the way like the armor's designed, it seems like an intentional nod to them. But yeah, I've never played those games, so can't really comment too much on it, but I just thought I'd mention that it's a thing. I think overall this episode goes in B tier. It's like not too bad. It's pretty good. So in this episode, the Bad Batch return to Kamino to rescue Hunter. When they go to Kamino, things seem a bit odd. Most of the cruisers are gone. There's only 3 Republic cruisers left. And when they actually enter the facility, they find it's pretty much mostly abandoned. They see maybe a handful of TK troopers taking some supplies away, but like it's pretty much abandoned, this facility. This episode, without a doubt, is going to be one of the best episodes for the whole Crosshair Bad Batch dynamic. We actually get to see Crosshair and Hunter talking quite a lot throughout this episode, which is quite interesting. We get to like see some like insights into how Crosshair sort of feels about the whole situation. Anyway, eventually the Bad Batch find out that Crosshair and his team are in the training facility. So they come up with a plan to come in through like the elevator in the middle of the room. The obvious way to enter would be from the front door, so they think we'll go this way, which proves to be exactly what Crosshair expected. So they go straight into his trap, which proves that yet again Crosshair knows the Bad Batch and outsmarts them on a regular basis. Anyway, there's a whole big discussion where Crosshair tries to convince the Bad Batch to join him. And then, like, conversely, the Bad Batch had, like, telling him that, you know, you don't have to work for the Empire. Like, you know, it's not you, it's the chip. And then Crosshair's like, it's all me. I had my chip removed ages ago. Which raises a few questions. It's not yet clear if he actually has removed it or not. I know there are a few moments where he's, like, got his hand on his head, right where the chip would be. So it's possible he was lying, but I don't know, maybe he has had it removed, but it's unclear as of yet. I imagine in the next season they'll probably elaborate on that more. Now, Crosshair does end up taking out the soldiers in his squad. One of the soldiers ends up escaping and tells Admiral Rampart that Crosshair's lost control of the situation. So with this little bit of news, Rampart then orders the cruisers to fire onto Poker City. The Bad Batch with Crosshair are all fleeing to get back to the ship when the cruisers open fire. We see as the city just starts getting obliterated and it starts sinking beneath the waves and all that. And it's a very powerful sight. This whole scene is just done really, really well. But anyway, Return to Kamino, easily an S tier. It is one of the best episodes of the show. Now, this episode, when it opens, we sort of see the continuation of the destruction of Kamino. We get to see basically the whole city sinking beneath the waves. Now, essentially, the plot for this episode is fairly straightforward. It's just that the Bad Batch need to get back to their ship. Basically, the goal is just to escape. It's really simple, but it's really good because it gives them a lot of time to interact. And we get to see Crosshair interacting with the rest of the Bad Batch. And it's really interesting to see like that sort of mutual bitterness that they have for each other. Both of them sort of, they sort of want like them all to be together again, but the Bad Batch feel betrayed by Crosshair and Crosshair feels betrayed by them. And there's that like sort of conflict there, which is really interesting. But overall, this episode it's a lot more slower paced. And yeah, we get to see the Crosshair interacting with the rest of the Bad Batch and with Omega, and it's just lots of good character interactions. So it's a really good episode for that. The ending for this episode, I think it's outstanding. Like, it's the perfect way to end. So they're looking out at the ruins of Poker City as day has come and the rain has finally stopped. So the weather is just, you know, peaceful for once. And they're all just looking out at what was once their home. It's sort of bittersweet in a way. Like, it's sad that their home has been destroyed, but in the same sense, they're also, I guess, free from it in a way. Anyway, and then the Bad Batch, they're about to leave, and they say to Crosshair that he's welcome to come with them if he wants, but he declines. And we have this one final exchange between Omega and Crosshair, where Omega reminds him that they're still his brothers. It was actually quite an emotional moment as well. It's really just really well done and a great way for them to end this season. So yeah, Kamino Lost, another easy S tier. Like, it is just a really well done ending. So yeah, here's the completed tier list. As you can see, there's nothing in F tier because, well, I just don't think there's any episodes that deserve to go on F tier. Moving up to D tier, we only have one episode, Decommissioned. This was just the weakest episode, and like it's got its moments. It's got a couple good moments, but ultimately, it's probably one of the only episodes that I don't want to watch. And it's just weaker. So it gets to sit on its own in D tier. Got a few in C tier, Cornered and Rampage and Infested. C tier is this is where I sort of put the episodes that I think are they're alright. There's nothing particularly bad about them. They're just not good enough to be like any higher than that. There's a whole bunch in B tier. So for me, B tier is basically just anything that I think is, good. Like they might not be outstanding, but they're very solid episodes. I will admit, Replacements was probably pretty close to going to C tier if it weren't for all the Crosshair stuff, which was really good. Then it probably wouldn't have been ranked in B tier. A tier is where I would put the really good episodes. So we got Battle Scars, which is just a really good episode. Bounty Lost as well, and Rescue on Ryloth. They're really good episodes, especially Battle Scars. That would probably be the highest one in A tier. And then S tier is where the best of the best go. And as you can see, the first episode and the last two episodes both made their way into S tier. So a very strong opening and a very strong ending. And we also have Reunion, which is got to be the best episode in the series, hands down. So yeah, that's my tier list for the first season of The Bad Batch. But feel free to make your own tier list. It'd be interesting to see what everyone else thinks. Is there something you think I've ranked too low or too high? But yeah, that's the tier list. So that's my thoughts on all the episodes of the first season of The Bad Batch. Now, if you enjoyed this, then please consider liking or commenting, subscribing or sharing. Try not to ask these things in all my videos. This one in particular is my biggest project thus far on the channel, so I hope you guys liked it. And if you want me to do the same thing for season 2, I can. Just let me know. Season 2 should be coming out pretty soon, actually. I'll probably do the same thing I did for the first season. I'll probably do a more general review, which is similar to what I normally do. And then if this video does well, I may do a tier list ranking for season 2 as well. And if there's anything else you want me to review, then please let me know. I'm open to suggestions, and I will need some new shows to watch. For my next review, I will be finishing Narcos Mexico. I've already covered the first 2 seasons, so I've only got season 3 left. I would like to say that I do highly recommend The Bad Batch. And yeah, let me know if you agree with my rankings, if there's any episodes you think I ranked too low or you think I praised too much. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Anyway, if you have watched this far, then thank you. Thank you for watching this far in. And I hope you enjoyed. And I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye.